All right, everyone. Welcome to another Esoterica Livestream. Coming to you live from Detroit, where you can't go outside because of the smoke. You can't eat lettuce because it will cause you to have explosive diarrhea, and you can't stay inside either because we're in the middle of a heat wave winding down. So yeah, so Detroit is kind of a mess these days, but welcome, folks. Glad to have everybody come and join me for another Esoterica live stream. Um, yeah, it's been a great bit of time here on the channel. Got a lot of cool stuff out this week or this past creation cycle. Like I try to do these live streams every 2, 3 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks. Um, and yeah, there's been so much going on the channel. I mean, we got the Middle Platonism seminar going, which has been a blast. I really enjoyed doing the Middle Platonism seminar, and there's just been a lot of material there that I've really enjoyed getting into, whether it's Plutarch or Antiochus of Ascalon. Um, as you'll probably notice during the course of those lectures, I'm really so much more at home in many ways with in the period of the first couple centuries around the turn of the Common Era, just because that's sort of the world I grew up in philosophically. I grew up in sort of the world of Stoicism and Epicureanism and Cynicism and Platonism and all of this, and so that's a world that I feel really really comfortable in, or pretty comfortable in. And so it's been really a joy to get into a lot of these relatively minor characters in the history of philosophy, whether it's, Antiochus of Ascalon or Eudorus of Alexandria or even Plutarch. Plutarch is a really interesting character because we don't typically think of Plutarch as a philosopher, but typically as a historian, right? And most of the people that read him primarily read him via his parallel lives. But of course, Plutarch was a philosopher. He was not only a philosopher, he was religious. This is the thing we were just talking about on the Patreon office hours. Is I got a fantastic question about what explains some of the more arcane or esoteric elements of Plutarch's thinking. Why does he seem to have this dualistic element to his philosophy? Why is the cosmos functioning the way that it is in Plutarch's argument? And my kind of shoot from the hip answer, and again, it's totally speculative here, is that so much of what's going on in Plutarch is at some level also an expression of his religiosity. That part of what's going on with Plutarch is he's not just doing philosophy, but he's also making philosophy and religion talk to each other in, I think, a very interesting way. So that was a moment where I got to do a bit of a hot take speculative stuff, which I'm much more happy to do, live streams and office hours I am do during lectures themselves. But at any rate, the Middle Platonism seminar has been a lot of fun. I've really been enjoying it. I really have enjoyed getting into some of this really more obscure, genuinely esoteric material. And we will pick it up not this weekend, but next weekend. This weekend I'm at the Detroit Book Fair, so I won't be able to pick up the seminar this time, but this weekend. But I will be returning to it with more of what's going on specifically in Athens with folks like Atticus and Taurus and some of those other folks who are admittedly are not that interesting, but we got to cover them. If we're going to do it, we're going to do it. We got to cover them all. So, but many thanks. Look at some of look at the last episode of the Middle Platonism series, and we're knee deep. I mean, we're 7 episodes in of what is probably going to be at least 14 or 15 episodes of the Middle Platonism seminar. And it's not huge numbers, but we're still looking at 20,000 views for the Philo of Alexandria, 23,000 views for Posidonius and Eudorus of Alexandria, just 11,000 views just because it dropped this week on Plutarch. That's still shockingly good numbers for being knee deep in very obscure philosophical territory. That 11,000 people, 20,000 people decided for whatever insane reason to take the time out of their day to watch an hour-long lecture on Eudorus of Alexandria or something. And so it just goes to show that so much of what I was told in the academic world was that there was just no interest in this material. No one wanted to learn about this stuff. No students wanted to learn about it, and therefore they shouldn't be taught. It shouldn't be taught. And this just, I think, just goes to show that there are tens of thousands of people out there who are very interested in this material and who want to have access to it. And again, I think that what academia doesn't really understand is that it's not that people don't want to learn it. Of course, they want to learn all kinds of things about philosophy and religion and art and literature. They just don't want to do it because they don't want to go into debt for hundreds of thousands of dollars to get no job on the other end of it. And I don't blame you. I completely understand why no one in their right mind wants to go into hundreds of thousands of dollars of debt, um, because who wants to do that and not get a job on the other side of it? It's not that. That's not the issue. The issue is people want access to education, but they want access to education in ways that are actually um, realistic and accessible, and not basically rendering you into indentured servitude. So so again, it's really all thanks to you guys. You guys are the folks who really make all this possible, and it's all thanks to what you've done to make this course possible by showing up on Patreon, watching the episodes, commenting, doing super thanks, and all that sort of stuff. So it's really, really so much in about you guys that have made all this possible, and for that, I'm deeply grateful that I get to teach this kind of course and make it publicly accessible to folks here on the channel. So thank you guys for allowing me the possibility of doing the educational work that I find the most rewarding in my life, and being able to do that work with you guys and for you guys at basically no cost. So what else has been going on the channel? Just released a really great conversation today that I had with Miss Sienna Wells, who is a manuscript dealer. She deals in medieval manuscripts. Works for Tom Ailing, who's a social media star all his own, and she's up and coming in the social media world. And had a great conversation with her about medieval scribes and how you can begin to, teach, how you begin to collect medieval manuscripts if you're ever interested. And many people think that medieval manuscripts are incredibly difficult to collect, but you can get a 15th century handwritten, hand illuminated sheet, just a sheet, but still, a lot, but a whole sheet for just a few $100. I mean, and again, I know that sounds like a lot. A few $100 is not nothing, but if you think about the idea of obtaining a piece of medieval art, right? How much does art cost? Art costs enormous amounts of money. I don't know, millions and millions of dollars. But the idea that you can attain a piece of medieval art for just a couple $100 is really, really extraordinary. And so the conversation with Sienna, you can find on the channel down below. I had a really great time chatting with her. She's really lovely. And yeah, I got to chat with her about collecting medieval manuscripts. So check out that episode that just came out earlier today. What else have we covered on the channel? Last week we did an episode on the Cathars. I mean, I've been slowly rolling out basically an entire series on the Cathars, which isn't done yet. It'll get done at some point soon. But in fact, I just picked up this newish edition of the best edition of the the collected works of the Cathars. If you are a French reader, if you read French, this is the best collection of Cathar literature in the world. So if you just want to get basically everything that survives from the Cathars, you want to pick up this volume by René Nelly, Écriture Cathar. So it's the Cathar writings. This is the best collection of everything the Cathars wrote. I will say that the introduction is it's pretty good. It's pretty good. The translations are really, really magnificent. So if you want Cathar material, that's going to be your best bet. But what we did was we covered the Cathar interpretation of the Lord's Prayer last week, which I found to be an extraordinarily strange and wonderful document, very interesting. And again, the idea that Jesus sinned. The Cathars are really hard on Jesus. They argued that when he was mulling over his own crucifixion and said, "If this chalice can pass from my hands," they saw that as a moment of sin, as opposed to just normal human doubt about being brutalized and killed. So the Catholics are really tough on Jesus in a way that I don't think I would be so tough on Jesus, and argued that he sinned, that Jesus sinned, and therefore that sin was such that he had to confront the devil over it and make do. So an interesting text from we don't know when it was from, 13th century, 14th century. It's really unclear when when the commentary on the Lord's Prayer was written by these so-called Cathars, but a fascinating document just the same. Also, by the way, the Cathar content that I do is a great example of me having to put my own opinions to one side. As you may know, I am a bit of a skeptic when it comes. I'm part of the skeptical camp when it comes to the Cathars. I'm not convinced that there were any Cathars. I don't think that there was certainly not a church, and there certainly weren't Cathar bishops and things like that. I don't think so. But what I do when I do Cathar content is always assume the traditionalist position and then tell the story as if the traditionalist position is true when I don't personally believe the traditionalist position. I tend to be more in the skeptical camp, and this is a place where I have to put my own opinions to the side and say, look, the consensus of scholarship is much closer to the traditionalist position than my own position, and therefore my job is therefore to present the material closest I can to the consensus, and that means teaching the material from the point of view of the traditionalist position as opposed to the position that I personally adopt, which is closer to the skeptical position. So again, this is again the sort of the weird job of what I do, is that my job is not to present my own opinions on this channel. I very rarely, I think, present my own opinions, but my job is to do my very best to present the consensus of scholarship, even especially when that disagrees with my own personal beliefs. And that's a great example in this episode on the Cathars, where I had to do just that. What else? We did cover the Cathars. I did the episode on the Divine Feminine, which I've been wanting to roll out for quite some time. Folks may know that the episode on the Divine Feminine is a modified version of a talk that I gave at the Apostolic Johannine Conclave, which is sort of the modern Gnostic church, and was there with those lovely folks out in Canada over the spring, and was able to give a version of that talk, a bit spicier version of that same talk, first to the folks at the Johannine Church, and then repackaged it to become this what became a sort of sprawling episode, 53 minutes long, relatively long for an esoteric episode, but it was neat to trace through various elements of the development of the Divine Feminine, specifically in the Abrahamic context, coming out from Judaism and then sort of merging with the talk of the Holy Spirit before eventually really emerging in the form of the Virgin Mary in the 13th century, and of course the Shekhinah, the feminine presence of God in the Kabbalah, the 10th Sphira Malchut. So at any rate, that was a really fun episode. I had a lot of fun building that narrative out based on a really strong article by Art Green, who I got drunk with at Purim one time. So yeah, it was with our article by Art Green, and really built out the idea of the Divine Feminine. I'm going to come back and do another episode on the Shekhinah, like a full episode on the development of the Shekhinah at some point. I'm not sure when I'm going to do that, but just the concept of the Shekhinah in the Zohar is so complex and rich, and there's so much going on there that I want to come back and cover that with a bit more depth than I did in that episode, which was very, at least in that part, quite cursory. So I'll come back later and do that with a bit more depth. What else? What other stuff have we been working on on the channel? I think the last thing I did before the last live stream was the Paracelsus. We wrapped up finally the Paragranum and the Paramirum. Folks may know that in Paracelsus studies, the most important early works, the sort of programmatic works, are the Paragranum and the Paramirum, and those works really set the agenda of what becomes Paracelsianism for the next several hundred years. And those works are very complex, extremely complex. Paracelsus is a very complex writer, very difficult writer. And we've been slowly working our way through these primary works, the so-called para works, the Paragram and the Paramirum, and we finally wrapped up the Paramirum on the matrix, the Paracelsus's concept of the matrix, and the concept of the matrix being this sort of innate cosmological fecundity that is the smallest part of the microcosm. It's sort of the opposite end of the ontological spectrum between the macrocosm, the creative macrocosm. The opposite end of that spectrum is the feminine microcosm, and that is what Paracelsus refers to as the matrix. And so we covered that at some length, and really kind of put an end to the first section of our analysis of Paracelsus, and that got us all the way through the Paramirum and Paragramma, as I said, and yeah, finally we wrapped up those. And of course, that doesn't mean we're done with Paracelsus. Those are just his early programmatic works. We still have to do his cosmological works, his meteorological works, his theoretical works, and his theological works. And so we have a ton more to cover in Paracelsus before we are remotely done with our boy Aureolus Theophrastus Bombastus von Hohenheim Paracelsus. So we have a lot to do before we are done with Paracelsus. What's coming up soon? What's coming up on the channel? I'm going to be doing an episode pretty soon on the so-called 8th Book of Moses found in the Greek Magical Papyri. In fact, there are 3 copies of the 8th Book of Moses in the Greek Magical Papyri. I'll be covering that with my colleague, Dr. Kirsten Svitza, who you folks may know. She and I covered the Akephalos, the headless god, and some other stuff in the Greek Magical Papyri as well. So she is an extraordinary scholar of the Greek Magical Papyri. So we'll be covering that in August, I think. And before that, I think the next thing I want to cover is the first episode in a series on theosophy, but theosophy going back to Jakob Böhme, not to Madame Blavatsky. So we're going to go all the way back to Jakob Böhme, and we're going to be doing the first episode in a series on Jakob Böhme and his development of theosophy. As you may know, Jakob Böhme is notoriously difficult as a writer, maybe one of the most difficult writers of this material. And in order to really treat him well, I've been torturing myself about how best to deal with Jakob Böhme, just because he's such a pain. But the way that I'm going to handle it actually is I'm going to start from the end of his career. At the end of his career, there was a collection of writings that he wrote near the end of his life, along with some other texts that were combined together as to make a kind of primer, as an introduction to the thought of Jakob Böhme. And this is a text called The Way to Christ. And it's sort of the greatest hits of theosophy. It's both a devotional book, it's a exegetical book, it's a theoretical book, and it also is profoundly mystical. And in that way, it's deeply theosophical in the strong sense of the word. So I'm fairly confident that the next episode of Esoterica is going to be the first in a series on Jakob Böhme, and we'll be dealing with the way to Christ, and then I'll work my way backwards to his various other books, the Mysterium Magnum, the Book of Three Principles, the Aurora. The Aurora is one of the most intimidating books in the history of Western esotericism, a sprawling, massive, unfinished work. So we'll get to the Aurora at some point. So at any rate, a new series on theosophy and the theosophy specifically of Jakob Böhme. But there's lots more coming. I mean, I have lots more coming. I'm trying to think of other stuff that I'm going to be rolling out. I'll do an episode on John the 22nd, Pope John the 22nd, really the most anti-magic pope ever. In fact, he really transformed the Western understanding of magic and the sin of magic more than any other Christian figure in many ways. And so Pope John the 22nd is going to be the subject of his own episode at some point coming up soon. So we'll be doing that. And do an episode on Catherine of Genoa. Again, my long-standing series on the Lady Mystics, because the Lady Mystics don't get nearly the coverage that they deserve. And so I want to be covering some of the lesser-known Lady Mystics. I mean, Julia of Norwich and Catherine of Siena, they have tons and tons of material on them. But how often do you hear about Catherine of Genoa, right? No one really hears about Catherine of Genoa. She had cool visions of purgatory. So we'll be talking about Catherine of Genoa at some point coming up soon. What else? What else? There's a lot more coming. So I don't know. A lot more coming down the pike, but a ton comes from a ton is coming down. So lots of more esoteric content to come. But yeah, of the Middle Platonism seminar, we're about halfway done. I'd say we're about halfway done. My goal is to wrap the Platonism seminar in early September. I think I'm going to wrap the Middle Platonism seminar in like September 6th is my goal. Like it's going to be done by then, come, hell or high water. It's going to be done by September 6th. Yeah, so we're about halfway done, maybe a little more than halfway done, but still a lot more to go. We still have the Neo-Pythagoreans that I'm really looking forward to getting to. Yeah, we have a bunch of stuff. So stay tuned for more Middle Platonism. But yeah, let me jump into some questions here on the chat and see, get these super chats, and then so I listen to you. So I like to listen to you like I listen to Matt O'Dowd of PBS Spacetime. Yeah, I like PBS Spacetime. I kind of get one word in out of 10, but enjoy the enthusiasm of your voices. Thank you. Why slagging the Epicureans? Seems like Goldilocks between Stoicism and hedonism. What did I miss? So why do I drag the Epicureans so much? Mostly it's for tradition's sake. This is one of the places where I've done a very bad job of hiding my bias. I try to do a really good job of hiding my bias. I think I do okay job of not letting my cards show, but there's just no way that I can talk about ancient philosophy honestly without just without being sort of on team Stoicism. Stoicism has been sort of a is just a core belief I've had since I was like a young teenager. And Stoicism is just something that makes a bunch of sense to me, like in sort of like a intuitive way, not exactly a vibes way, but there's something about Stoicism that deeply speaks to me and always has. And because I run with the Stoics, you gotta give it to the Epicureans as early and often. And there's even a slur that's used against the Epicureans. Basically, anytime they're brought up by the Stoics and even by other philosophers like the Platonists, is that Epicureanism is a philosophy of harlots, that it is an ethic of harlots. And of course, and far from me to slander sex workers, but it's a rote thing to make fun of Epicureans. And so but mostly tongue in cheek, making fun of Epicureans. I'm kind of guy. I have Epicurean friends. I think they're hanging out in their garden, hanging out, making friends and being friends. Good for them. But most of the shade I'm throwing at the Epicureans is for tradition's sake. I'm just part of the classic line of Stoic diatribes that throw shade at the Epicureans. So I'm not serious, but I'm also not unserious. But thank you for the super sticker, the super chat. So why not use gloves when handling antique books? So this is a question that I get all the time when I talk about handling antique books. So there are actually two reasons for this. The first reason why you don't wear gloves while handling antiquarian books is because cotton fibers of the antiquarian books the paper of antiquarian books is often rag paper, usually made out of linen or other forms of rag paper, and it has grain. And the fibers of cloth of white gloves can grab those fibers of the page and tear them. And so it has been the case that through many, many years of experience, most institutions, with the exception of sometimes handling manuscripts, most institutions hold that you're far more likely to damage a book wearing gloves than you are to anything else. So more books have been damaged, and I've seen it happen in person. I've seen someone wearing gloves damage a book because of the gloves. So the gloves are much more likely to damage the book than to preserve it. Most institutions, the Smithsonian, the British Museum, most institutions that do this, their recommendation are clean, dry hands. So as long as you have clean, dry hands, this gets to my next point. Many old books, I'm just trying to reach for one that I have a great example for that I know is old. So if I get this copy here of Balthazar Becker's On the Enchanted World, you'll notice that this is what is called blind stamped pigskin. This is effectively leather, right? So this is a book by Balthazar Becker. It's an important book in the history of the witch trials. But this leather, right, can get very, very dry, and it can get very, very brittle when it gets dry, and it can crack along these hinges. Very, very common to see books cracked along these hinges. Handling a book with the natural oils of my hand actually contributes to this book being more supple over time, because the oils of my hand actually help to prevent this from getting too dry. So in some ways, handling the book with clean, dry hands helps to preserve books, especially those with leather covers. So the answer is, the reason why I don't wear gloves is because I don't want to damage books. I don't want to damage books. Simple as that. So anytime you see someone going on and on and on about, oh, Sledge or Reed Moon or Adam Weinberger or whatever, they don't care about their books. They don't treat them respectfully because they're not wearing gloves. Trust me, and trust all of us to know that we are actually not wearing gloves precisely because we want to preserve the books. Now you know. So The Matrix and Soul Reaver both draw on Gnosticism and came out in 1999. Was there a new discovery in the 90s or something, or just a coincidence? So I don't know. I can't say anything about Soul Reaver, so I don't know anything about this, whether it's like a game maybe. So I can't speak to that. But The Matrix, I think, and I haven't deep dove into the Wachowskis about exactly what they thought about Gnosticism. But I know it must have been playing some influence in there. But in the 90s were a huge time for Gnosticism. So you got lots of really big documentary shows about the Gnostics featuring people like Karen King and what's her name at Harvard? Karen King was at Harvard too. What's her name? Uh, the really big lady who studies Gnosticism. No, I can't believe I can't believe her name is now escaping my mind. But at any rate, there was a lot of like attention on Gnosticism in the 1990s. This is also around the time that like the Dan Brown was out, and you have some of the residual stuff from like Holy Blood, Holy Grail, or whatever, the sort of conspiratorial Holy Grail stuff. So at any rate, it was just a good time for Gnosticism to be out in the 90s. So I think it was a bit in the air in the 90s in a way that it was less so in the 2000s. And also there's apocalyptic fervor that was sort of really gripping things in the late 90s with all the Y2K and the Mayan calendar coming to an end, although the Mayan calendar didn't come to an end, just reset one more back tune or whatever. So I think that was a thing. Also, another book that really drove the Wachowskis philosophically when the development of the Matrix was Jean Baudrillard's Simulacrum and Simulation, which also is a huge influence on them as well. In fact, I think it's the book that Morpheus takes off the shelf when he's about to reveal everything to Neo, is a copy of Baudrillard's Simulacrum and Simulation. Although Baudrillard has one of my favorite quotes about the movie. Baudrillard famously said that the Matrix is the kind of movie that the Matrix would have made. And when you see the sequels, I completely agree with it. It's all about this sort of messianic character. One guy, messianic character, is going to come and save everything. And it's like he gains magical powers that work outside the Matrix and everything else. The first movie was fantastic, but certainly the second and third, they kind of jumped the shark for me, and I find them to be not as interesting. But yeah, Joan Baudrillard said famously that the Matrix is the kind of movie that the Matrix would make, and I kind of believe that. I kind of believe that. Oh, Frater RC, great to see you, brother. Hope you're doing well. Looking forward to hearing news about the Enokia Con. I hope it goes well or went well. I'm not sure if it's where are we in the going of it. But yeah, thank you for the 5 Esoterica memberships. That's very, very kind of you. I really appreciate that. Let's jump back over here, and folks, and again, if you want to get in a question for sure during the live stream, and you want to use the super chat or super sticker, it does help to keep the lights on. So much appreciated if you do. But I'll try to get to everybody, even if you don't, because I don't want it to be just pay to play. That's kind of gross. All right. Have I ever had interest in making content on Walter Benjamin. He's a little late, and I can't say that I know Walter Benjamin all that well, aside from his really famous, stuff. Although my business partner who works with me over at the book side of things, Morgan Meese, wrote his dissertation on Walter Benjamin. So maybe I'll bring Morgan on at some point to talk about Benjamin, because he's a true expert in him in a way that I'm certainly not. Uh, All right, scroll through here. Yeah, thanks for mentioning the Know Thyself podcast with Andre. It was a really great conversation. I really enjoyed talking with Andre. He's a really great interviewer, a really great host. Just really a great conversation in general. I really like those long form. I think we talked for like 4 hours, of which 3.5 hours or so became part of the episode. But yeah, really great conversation with Andre, and a really great podcast. So if you haven't checked it out yet, go over to the Know Thyself podcast and check out Andre and I's 3.5 hour conversation. Um, Sometimes after 2.5 hours, 3 hours, my brain's just like mush. So it was a great conversation and felt great when I was finished with it. Yeah, we need more Islamic esoterica content. If you want that content, you can go over to Philip Holmes' channel at Let's Talk Religion. Philip makes tons of great content on lots of topics, religion generally, but his stuff on Sufism and esoteric Islam, the Brethren of Purity, and Ismailism, and all that stuff. He does a ton of material on that. So check out his channel for all of that material. So, are you interested in doing research into esoteric Freemasonry? The organization has some fantastic connections. So, yes and no. More no than yes. And the reason why more no than yes is because Freemasonry exists right at the edge of where I have any expertise. So, my interest in esotericism and my expertise in esotericism goes up to about 1750. So, about 1750 is where I kind of cut off basically Swedenborg. And so after Swedenborg, I pretty rapidly lose interest in esoteric currents. After that, not to say that I'm illiterate about them, but I certainly don't know a lot about them, and I'm not going to be doing a lot of research into them anytime soon. And so Freemasonry comes to exist around that time period, and because it comes to exist around that time period, it's just at the very end of where I find esotericism interesting and where my expertise lies. So probably not going to be doing any work on Freemasonry. Very unlikely. Very unlikely. But never say never, bleeding at air. Who knows? Things can change. Yeah, thank you. Thank you, ATL FA5 for the esoteric memberships. I really appreciate you making that donation to the channel. Very, 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 very grateful. Any interesting thoughts on Eastern Orthodoxy you'd share? Saint Cyprian and Justina of Antioch of Grimoire fame are my favorites. Thanks for Mississippi. Hope things are going well down in Mississippi. It's my homeland. I hope you're doing well down there. I don't have any interesting thoughts on Eastern Orthodoxy. I don't know much about Eastern Orthodoxy, to be honest. My expertise is in the Latin West. I know a little bit of stuff in the pagan world, the philosophical world of late antiquity, with Proclus and Iamblichus and Damascius and the Middle Platonists. So that's my world. But in terms of the development of Eastern Orthodoxy, I don't know much at all. And so it's just a gap in my knowledge, and it's not a thing that I know a ton about. So I'm much more interested in Latin Western mysticism, which I would say, again, it's funny to call that East, but I'm typically more interested in Latin Western mysticism, and there's so much to study in the West. So maybe certainly needs to be an Eastern Orthodox version of me who will cover all of the cool esotericism of the Eastern Church, because I'm sure there's tons of great stuff, and hopefully they can cover it, and they will cover it much better than I ever would, because I just don't know enough about it. It's an interesting question. What is your thoughts on the idea that virtually all philosophical and theological inquiries are unique perspectives on one underlying truth? How does this compare to your own beliefs? I doubt there's one underlying truth. That seems unlikely to me, given what we know about reality. It seems like it's very possible that reality probably has some mutually exclusively acting systems, and so I would be surprised if things are so elegant. And I think that it's just really an epistemological bias, an a priori bias, a bias based on elegance, the theory of elegance, that somehow the universe needs to be elegant. And I think that reality needs to be elegant. And I think that that's an a priori assumption. And it's just as likely to me that the universe and reality is not elegant. And therefore, it is that there is not one underlying principle. There could be many underlying principles. There could even be mutually non-interacting principles that go at this. And sometimes I think about this with quantum mechanics and gravity, is that we keep looking for, and we should keep looking for, an underlying principle that unites quantum physics and gravity. And the reason why we do that is because we're pretty committed to the philosophical idea of reductionism, which has been the most successful scientific theory ever. I mean, reductionism is the most scientific theory, most successful theory, period. And we assume that reductionism runs all the way through, but it could be the case that reductionism doesn't run all the way through, and they're actually just fundamentally different metaphysics operating and fundamentally different physics operating at different levels of reality. I'm totally open to that possibility, that we are looking at just an episodic universe, to use the language of someone like Speusippus. So that's totally possible, and the fact that we just don't even imagine that as possible shows just how biased we are toward a philosophical position, something like naturalness and elegance, as opposed to saying, where does the data lead us? And if the data doesn't lead us to more natural or more elegant positions via metaphysics and via physics, then we shouldn't assume them and then go to prove them. That's not science. That's dogma. And so I think that I'm totally open to the idea that there's no underlying unity, and that what might be is like pure difference. That's totally possible. Kind of an eventual ontology, a la Spinoza, a la the Stoics, or something like that. But that's totally possible, totally within the realm of possibility. I just feel like we don't like that because it strikes us as, like I said, it strikes us as inelegant. But the universe and reality have no duty to be elegant. No duty to be elegant. Wow. If you were invited to a reenactment of a 19th century treasure dig, would you participate? Like Joseph Smith Jr.'s? Any sources on them? If I were invited to a reenactment of a 19th century treasure dig, would you participate? Yeah, I guess. I mean, I would get up, dress up in 19th century clothes, and go dig around. But yeah, I would do that. That sounds fun, I guess. What guy doesn't like to get dressed up in 19th century clothes and go dig around for treasure? That sounds fun. In terms of 19th century treasure hunting or treasure hunting in general, there's a great book called Treasure Hunting Magic. I've did a whole episode, unsurprisingly. I've done a whole episode on treasure hunting magic. There's a whole book about it. And so if you want to take a look at that, feel free. As opposed to treasure hunting in general, I don't know of a specific book. Not really showing up to my real goony threads here with my lack of knowledge of 19th century treasure hunts. But I would certainly like to do one. Hey, Vocatus, thank you for the Esoterica memberships. I really appreciate your donation. Very kind of you, man. It's good to see you. Thank you for your really kind donation and the other episode that was just out. So I really appreciate that, brother. Thank you. What's your favorite non D&D tabletop role playing game? I've never played another tabletop role playing game ever. So I have no idea. Maybe like I have Call of Cthulhu over there. And I just have that because I love, the Lovecraft stuff, but I've never played it. But yeah, Call of Cthulhu would be maybe the one I would pick, just because it's Lovecraft theme, and I like the idea that you're basically like having to contend with going insane. So that would be fun. But I've never played any other other tabletop role playing game. Yeah, thank you again from Mississippi for the super sticker. Very appreciated. Thank you. All right, let's scroll down here and get a couple of questions. Not a couple of questions. I get a few questions in here. Um, let's see. I'll scroll down here and get some questions. I like the fact that you guys like all jumped on the clean dry hands in the chat. Everyone's like, yeah, like no gloves, always clean dry hands. Like you guys like really did the work for me. Good for you. You guys are super smart. Um, Dr. Sledge is a traditionalist. I am a traditionalist, actually. When it comes to the debate between the perennialists and the traditionalists, I am a kind of a traditionalist, actually. Not like Evola and those cats. Definitely like that. But yeah, I tend to fall in the traditionalist camp much more so than the perennialist camp, which is sometimes surprising to people. But that is the case. That is the case. Whereas the Akephalos video, I think if you just go to YouTube and search for Akephalos or Headless God and Esoterica, you will find it. It will come up really fast. In fact, me and Dr. Schwitza did a whole like 3-hour long deep dive into the Akephalos ritual in the Greek magical papyri. Really got into it, and yeah, really got into a lot of that material, which was really, really great. Frater RC, Sundays at 8 to noon, we play D&D on Zoom. Always welcome. Next up, Shadowrun. Then, what is it? WW Changeling. Is that World of... What is it? I don't know. Is it White Wolf? Is that what is that? It's like the White Wolf is like the Vampire the Masquerade and that stuff. But no, I'm gonna actually. I've been threatening for years to start up my table back here in Detroit with some of my friends here, but I need to. I keep threatening it and never do it, so I need to follow through on my word and strike up a new D&D campaign. Yeah, I'm very inspired by my buddy Matt, who is also my book conservator, does all my book work, who has been running a tabletop game for decades, playing AD&D, which is what I grew up on. You know, Thacos, and you have to look up tables for whether you kick through a door or not. And yeah, so I was like really inspired by him to maybe go back and start up an old school AD&D campaign, because I really like. I mean, I love the functionality of 5th edition, but I really like the chunky nerdness of AD&D with all those tables and Thacos and all that stuff. So maybe I'll start up a AD&D campaign at some point. I can break out my old books from when I was a kid and stuff. So, but Friday RC, thank you for the invitation. It's very kind of you. Was watching the Andre the video and was a little surprised to hear that you don't believe in God. Can you get into this a little more? I don't find any compelling reason to believe in gods. I also find this to be the least interesting belief or lack of belief to have. I find that it's a particularly like Protestant thing, maybe, to like this belief in God business. I don't know. I find it to be a very uninteresting question. And anyways, not that you say your question's uninteresting, but I find the obsession about belief to be actually have very little to be about belief and nothing to do about religion or spirituality for that matter. And so when someone asks like, do you believe in gods? I'm like, no, I don't believe in any gods, but also like I'm pretty religious in many ways. And my religiosity has nothing to do with whether or not I believe in gods. In fact, I would say that my belief or lack of belief is uninteresting compared to my religious impulse, my sort of sensus divinitatus, or whatever you want to call it, from Plantinga. So yeah, I often find this sort of obsession with belief to be what's the right word? Chasing one's tail, and not in the cool Ouroboros way, but in like that you don't know that you're chasing your own tail. So yeah, I find that to be uninteresting. And in fact, I've referred to myself, and I'm going to write an essay about this at some point. Usually typically refer to myself as a post-theist. That the question of whether or not there's a God is the least interesting question when it comes to the question of meaning making vis-a-vis religion and spirituality and philosophy. So no, I don't happen to believe in any gods. Most monotheists basically believe in most. They basically don't believe in most gods. I think I've always made the joke that the monotheists are the closest to atheists you'll ever get because they really intensely believe in one God. So that means they're just one God away from atheism. Just one God away. So sorry, folks. You see me coughing a little bit. It's because right now in Detroit, we're living through the end times, apparently. We're having like wildfire smoke coming in from Canada. I blame the Canadians. That is like choking the Midwest. I mean, we're like literally like the AQI out here is like 500 or something. It's like, I mean, it's like above the highest reading you can get. And so even the smoke from outside is still getting into the house, even though we have all the doors closed. And so if you see me kind of coughing and choking a little bit, it's because of this vicious Canadian smoke. Frater RC, I'm going to blame you and your Canadian folks for sending the terrible smoke down here to America. Maybe we deserve it. That's a good question. So 1750s is the front edge. How far back do you go, or is there no limit? I got a lot of impression of this material is rooted in ancient Sumer. I go back basically as far as I feel confident that I have something interesting to say, and I can read the material. So like if I can read Ugaritic, when I can read some Ugaritic through Hebrew, I feel okay talking about the biocycle. I can read some Akkadian through a glass darkly through some previous stuff. So do I find that I'm going to be spending a lot of time in Sumerian literature? No. Maybe a little bit here and there, but it's very hit and miss when I go back to antiquity. When it goes back to Canaanite stuff, I feel pretty confident that I can work in that material because I read the languages and I know the scholarship okay. But am I going to be hanging out a lot in like Hittite land? Probably not. Although literally on my table is an episode I do want to make is on the Hittites. This is a great collection. I'm sorry if it's reversed in the thing, but this is a great collection of Hittite myths. And so I do want to do an introduction to Hittite mythology at some point because I feel like that material is okay. Although Hittite as a language is a real bear. But no, there's not an edge going back. But as you'll probably notice, that most of my content is between sort of late antiquity and 1750. Right, that's sort of the sandwich, and I can venture out a little bit prior to that, and I'll venture out a little bit out of that in the 19th and 20th century, but not a whole lot. I might cover the spiritualists, which get us into the early 18th century. I might mention Aleister Crowley from time to time, but I'm not going to be doing episodes on the Book of the Law or maybe a couple episodes on Austin Osborne Spare, just because I like him a lot. I think he's just one of the. I mean, Crowley sucks all the air out of the room. But in terms of like a real proletarian, working class mystic, I will take Austin Osborne Spare every day of the week over Uncle Al. So, but that's generally speaking. But to say that it's all rooted in ancient Sumer, that's not true. I mean, the Sumerians were a very particular group of people. They were subsumed very quickly by their Semitic conquerors, the Akkadians. Their language became an important classical language in the ancient world. But yeah. Sometimes people think because they're the earliest civilization to write that they had this huge impact on civilizations around them, but I think that that's less true and really only true because of the diffusion of the influence of the Akkadian Empire and the Assyrian Empire and the spread of that kind of knowledge outside of the Fertile Crescent. Let's see. Any Jewish resources on divine hiddenness, specifically divine hiddenness as a function of allowing for death, God being separate from his creation, allowing for the possibility of death. Not vis-a-vis death. I mean, in Judaism, at least, God is directly responsible for human death via the angel of death, the Malach HaMavis. And so God's not separate from us when we die. In fact, if you're extremely righteous, you die from a divine kiss. God actually kisses you, you pass from this world like Shimon Bar Yochai and Moses. So not only when you die is God not distant from you, God is in some cases the most intimate with you. God dispatches you with a divine kiss. But specifically divine hiddenness, there's a lot written on this. The Hidden and Manifest God by Schaeffer. It's a great example of divine hiddenness. Um, Elliot Wolfson has written very good on this. I can't remember. Through a Speculum That Shines is probably his best book on this topic, where he'll get into the topic of divine hiddenness. So those are both great books. The Hidden and Manifest God and Through a Speculum That Shines by Wolfson and Schaeffer. So those would be the ones that I would check out. But no, there's no sense that God being hidden from you is the reason why people die. In fact, like I said, God specifically um, reaches out, and if you're especially righteous and you die through a kiss. Uh-oh. Colin said he's super offended, sir. I'll have to wait for the essay to my follow-up question. You can always ask it. But yeah, this is a thing that sometimes I guess surprises people, that I'm a post-theist, that I find the question of whether gods exist uninteresting and uncompelling. And in fact, I think I even say on my FAQ that everything I know about the gods that I've ever read about gods just seems awful. So if there were gods at all, we would need to like organize a rebellion against them. I've never read anything about any gods that I find comforting, or with some exceptions of like Meister Eckhart mysticism stuff. But in general, the gods seem like just right bastards. So if there were gods, we should overthrow them. So I'm glad there aren't any. Or at least I don't see any evidence of there being any gods. Toward the light bill, I appreciate that. Toward the air conditioning bill, unfortunately, this past week we've had like triple digit. It's like 40 degrees Celsius here, like 100 degrees Fahrenheit, extremely hot, and so really, really hot. So very appreciative to the light bill, and to the air conditioning bill. All right. Yeah, the Dark City. Someone mentions. Yeah, Pagels. Yeah, everybody's getting me the correct name for Elaine Pagels. With all due apologies to to Professor Pagels. But yeah, Dark City. Actually, I'm glad that you mentioned this, Layla. Dark City is a far better movie than The Matrix. I way prefer Dark City to The Matrix, and not just because Jennifer Garner's in it, or and that's a good reason though, because she's late '90s is like amazing Jennifer Garner territory. Just like the picture of beauty. But I think Dark City is a far better movie than The Matrix. Philosophically, stylistically, everything. It's a better movie. So go watch Dark City if you have not seen it. All right, let's see a couple of things as well. A good recommendation for the Hechelot literature, there's only one, at least in English, and that is James de Villa's translation of the Hechelot literature. And you can get it through Brill for hundreds of dollars. So that's the only one that you can get that's available. I would love to see a more introductory level translation of the Hechelot literature. If I were a man with much more time, I would produce one of those. I would produce a translation of some of the Hechelot literature with a little bit more accessible to the wider audience. But at this time, the only translation of the Hechelot literature is James de Villa's. All right. Beside Codex 6 of the Nag Hammadi library, where else can I read about the ancients tuning their music in alignment with the planetary spheres? I mean, I'm not even sure it's Nag Hammadi 6 specifically does this. But yeah, I don't know of any other specific texts. I mean, the Orphic hymns existed, but who knows how they were tuned? I mean, there's a little bit of idea of tuning things to specific meters in Plato's Republic. He talks a little bit about it, but I don't know of any specific overlap of music and the planetary spheres. Ficino talks about this a good bit, actually. So if you want to jump forward out of antiquity and get into contemporary times, Ficino talks about this, and there's music that was composed to represent the spheres, and you can see some of that music. Um, I think you can listen to some of that music played on YouTube, but I think it's the only place. I mean, we have very little examples of any music from antiquity. And in fact, we just have these little, what are called neumes, which are this little notation over words that we're fairly confident are musical notations, but no one's totally confident about how to read them. So, do I have an episode on the entire Baal cycle? I mean, I basically covered the entire Baal cycle in my Baal episode, so I don't think I'll do a whole episode on just the Baal cycle because I basically covered it in my episode on Baal. So you're welcome to check out that episode on Baal and see what I have to say about the cycle. Am I on OnlyFans? This is a great question. This is the only question that matters, folks. Am I on OnlyFans? I am not. Should I be on OnlyFans? What would I offer? I don't even want to think about that. It'd be me and Edward Kelly and John Dee's wife. Sorry, that was a terrible joke. No, I am not on OnlyFans. I'm not on any social media, basically. I mean, our Instagram, we have an Instagram for the book business. That's mostly like esoteric bookstagram, but there's no like esoterica social media. I don't have any social media. I'm not on Twitter or X or whatever they're calling it, the nightmare hellscape that is that. But no, I don't have any. I don't have any social media. Thank God. It seems like terrifying to me. Social media seems terrifying. All right. All right. Some of the questions here. Thank you for what you do. More Parmenides, please. I don't think so. I think I've done all the Parmenides I'm going to do. I think I covered everything I want to say about Parmenides in the episode on him. So that's probably all the Parmenides you'll get for at least any time coming. So yeah, I don't know that I'll do any more on Parmenides. I mean, formalizing the way of truth was tough enough. So you have to just binge watch my Parmenides episode. But thank you for the super sticker. Consider doing something on the Incas and the Andes. They didn't have a written language. Well, they have the rope language. They had that, and of course, they still speak Quechua and other languages. I think down there. But their missionary descriptions of the religion maybe discuss that. I don't know. I don't know anything about the the indigenous religions. So it's kind of thing that if I don't know much about it, with the Maya, I can know a little bit about it because they're written sources and we can decipher them and I can say something about them. And I've taught myself to read a little Maya. But with the Andean stuff, one, I've never been there, although I'm planning to go at some point pretty soon, actually. And but no, I just don't know enough about it to say that I would ever do an episode on it anytime soon. But certainly extremely interesting. Like they had the mummified ancestors, and the mummified ancestors had sort of avatars that spoke to them. And when the two brothers were at civil war, the various avatars are telling them what to do. And I think it's Pizarro invaded, and he was able to take advantage of this warring situation. It's fascinating material. But I don't know much about it outside of sort of, again, Wikipedia level knowledge of what went on down there. But certainly fascinating material, and I'd like to learn more about it. But maybe an episode in the future, but I don't know. So I'm about 100 years late with this question, but how highly do you rate the accuracy of the documentary hypothesis, and do you think Moses predates the late Persian, early Hellenistic period? Accurately, I don't know. I'm kind of the mind that I don't really care if you go with the documentary hypothesis or the supplementary hypothesis. I think that the answer is probably somewhere in the middle. Do I think Moses predates the Persian Hellenistic period? I'm of the mind that the Moses story is probably pretty late. I think it's based on the Elijah stories. I think Moses is based on Elijah rather than the other way around. And so I think those stories are relatively late. I do think they contain a core. Like I'm okay with like Richard Friedman's idea that maybe the Levitical priest class may have been sort of folks who left Egypt, some priests that left Egypt. That seems possible. I would never die on that hill, obviously, but I'm not super committed to either one of them. But yeah, I do think the Moses story is relatively late. How late? I don't know. I don't think Hellenistically late. I think probably, maybe Persian period is slightly before the exile. Because there's some Psalms and stuff that mention Moses, and so I think those are relatively. Again, I think it's an earlier memory, but the 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 complete story, I think, is the whole Exodus story. I think is a relatively late story. In the director's cut of Dark City, you get to hear Jennifer Connelly's voice in the songs rather than the Amy Mann overdub of the original. Interesting. I did not know that was not Jennifer Connelly singing. I just thought that she was completely perfect in every way. And how would you dub over her? That's a crime against humanity. Interesting. I'm going to check that out. This is I did not know actually there was a director's cut. So this is like Gnosis for me. I know what I'm doing this weekend, watching the director's cut of Dark City, which I also need to see the new Evil Dead movie and the new Odyssey movie. But this is a deep cut for After RC. I appreciate that. If you rebel against the gods, they will send Sekhmet. That's fine. We'll send nukes. And what are the gods going to do without us? Again, we have the ultimate thing we can do. We can eliminate ourselves, and then the gods will be bereft of anyone to worship them. So let them send whatever god they want, and we will nuke the skies. Have you ever done a deep dive into near-death experiences and analyzed their overlap with mystical teachings, perhaps particularly the visions of light? I've not. Near-death experiences just don't really interest me very much. Like, I think that the brain shutting down asynchronously generates all kinds of strange phenomenology. I think that mystics are doing something very different. Although I would not be surprised if asynchronous brain shutdown pantomimes some of the kind of things that happen to mystics. But no, I've never found near-death experiences to be either interesting or evidence for anything. That the fact that people seem to report similar things is unsurprising, considering we all have the same brains. But I've never found the experiences themselves to be of any special interest. I don't know why that is, but they just never struck me as interesting. But yeah, so I don't think I'll ever do anything on near-death experiences, just because they're in many ways a completely modern phenomena. In a lot of ways, maybe with the exception of a couple other things, but they're like more of a contemporary thing. I love your channel. Thank you. I'm currently in the midst of your Platonic series. I love your discussion with Chris Brennan. I did too. Chris has been leaving some great comments on the channel recently. Rough one really last night, actually, on my episode on Petasiris. Chris is always leaving very thoughtful comments, and I really appreciate you, Chris Brennan, if you're out there. Any planning on collaborating with astrologers in the future? Thanks for sharing your knowledge. I hadn't planned on it. I mean, I'd like to do something on. It'd be cool to sit down with Chris and talk a little bit more, maybe about astral necromancy. This is a topic I find to be very interesting, and sort of the intersection of classical necromancy with astrology. So maybe Chris and I could sit down and talk about that. I might be going to Denver in November, maybe for the AAR SBL conference. I might go out there to Denver, and maybe if Chris is around, maybe we could sit down and chat about astral necromancy or something. But I don't have any specific plans for bringing on any other astrologers at the time. But I'd love to talk to Chris again. I really appreciate him. I appreciate his insights, and I appreciate the work he's done to make Hellenistic astrology better understood, and for folks who practice it, good for them. And I find that I really find that his work to be fantastic. Do an episode on Marian devotion. Maybe specifically rooted in some specific mystics. I might do something on Marian devotion, but I don't have any plans to do an episode on Marian devotion writ large. So, I think I covered what I wanted to cover, at least as far as I wanted to, in sort of the rise of 13th century Marian devotion and the episode on the divine feminine. But I'm not sure if I'll come back to do one specifically on Marian devotion. Thank you for the super sticker. I appreciate that very much. Thank you. Thanks for the recommendations on the Hechelot literature and also for all the great videos on the channel. Please do not join OnlyFans, I beg you. It'd be very sad to see you have to do that to keep the AC on. Hey, man, if you got it, flaunt it. And if you got it, use it to keep the AC on. I'm, as long as folks are getting paid a living wage and they're, have a good union and they are taking care of themselves. Work is work, man. I'm not one to judge sex work. Work is work. And if folks can get by doing it in this terrible economy and they take care of themselves and take care of their loved ones, far from me to, to put down a fellow worker. And whatever ways we got to exploit ourselves to, to make a buck around this world. So possible origins on magic circles, pretty ubiquitous after the Bronze Age, possibly from Babylonian magic bowl exorcisms. Do we see evidence of them in early Bronze Age Egyptian magic? My guess is that the reason why we like magic circles is because they're geometric figures that don't end, right? They're unlike squares and other kinds of geometric figures. They don't end. And I think there's something about the enclosing power of an unending, single-sided, as much as it has a side, single-sided figure that just is very powerful visually. It's very powerful geometrically. The math to generate it, pi seems to be ubiquitous in reality. And so there seems to be something magical about the fact that pi seems to show up in lots of places. And of course, you need to use pi to construct and measure triangle or measure circles. Triangles too, kind of. But I think that there's compounding mathematical, geometrical, and just gestalt psychological reasons why magical circles developed and have the sort of power that they do. So yeah, I would be surprised if they don't go back to prehistory. I don't think they're unique to the Bronze Age or our age. I'm pretty sure that circular forms. I mean, I think about Newgrange and Stonehenge, and other kinds of structures like that are circular in fashion. I'm pretty sure that the impulse to the power of the circle probably goes back well into prehistory. So I don't think at all it's an artifact of history. I think it's probably very much something reaching back well into prehistory. All right, what time is it? Yeah, I got about 22 more minutes, folks. I'm gonna hang out for about till about 2:30. Then I got to get going. Wow. Okay, let me run down to the bottom of the comments down here and see if I can just get a couple of questions from this part. Have I ever watched Full Metal Alchemist? I have not. I have not watched any anime of any kind since I was maybe like a teenager. I think the last anime that I really got into was like Macross Plus and like Ninja Scroll, which apparently they're re-releasing in they're re-releasing in 4K in theaters. And that's all thanks to my great buddy Russell, who really had a great taste in anime. But I have not watched any anime since like the late 90s. So no, I've never watched Full Metal Alchemist. Although people say it's great. I don't read Hebrew, so excuse the question if it's ignorant. No ignorant questions around here. But wasn't ancient Egypt called Kemet, and wasn't called Egypt until the Hellenistic era or similar? Is this an odd inconsistency? Yeah, I mean, lots of places get called lots of different words by lots of different people. I mean, think about the fact that we don't call Greece, Hellene. Like that's what they called it, So they're Hellenes. They never call themselves Greeks. India is not called India. It's Bharat. So lots of places get known by lots of different names. The Israelites called Egypt Mitzrayim for reasons that aren't clear to us, but they called it Mitzrayim, which means like the narrow places. And the Egyptians called their territory Kemet. And of course, they separated their territory into two realms. There's Kemet, the black land, and there's Deshret, the red land. It had nothing to do with the color of the skin of the people who lived there. Egyptians were a multi-skin toned people then as much as they are now. Kemet was a name for the agricultural land closest to the Nile and the marshes, and Deseret was for the desert outside to the west. And so that's what they called it. But it's unsurprising that places get called lots of different names by different people in different eras. So yeah, so that's just not unique to Egypt. It happened to India, happens to Greece, happens to lots of places. All right. Was the tabernacle and the Ark of the Covenant real? Probably. Probably. I mean, there's a whole Ark of the Covenant um, um, cycle in the Hebrew Bible that seems to be relatively ancient. And the fact that people had a mobile shrine, we know of lots of other mobile shrines that existed. You can see something very much like the Ark of the Covenant in the tomb of Tutankhamun. So I think that is it possible that there was the Israelites had some groups of Israelites had a mobile shrine that they carried with them, and they had a mobile, and in that they had a chest, a sacred chest that contained sacred artifacts. That seems very possible to me. So that seems very possible to me. All right. Did I ever read Spinoza's Ethics? Yeah, very much so. I've taught Spinoza's Ethics. I would consider myself a kind of Spinozist, actually. What are my thoughts on Spinoza? That yes, Spinoza's kind of right in many ways. I'm on Team Spinoza in many many ways. I've been visited his house a few times. I got a whole episode on Spinoza that if you want to check it out. So me and Zevi and Philip did a whole three-way collaboration on Spinoza and pantheism and mysticism. And so I did a whole episode on the pantheismus trait, the pantheism controversy with Spinoza. So you can check out my episode on Spinoza. But yeah, I'm a big fan of Spinoza. Oops. Do I think there was a real human being named Jesus Christ? He wasn't named Jesus Christ. Christ is a title, not a name. Jesus the Christ. Do I think that Jesus existed? Yes, I think Jesus of Nazareth is very likely a real person. I think he was likely a real person. I think he was an apocalyptic preacher following after his forebear John the Baptist, and I think that he went into Jerusalem, caused a ruckus, and got himself executed. Very sadly, got himself executed. And so, yeah, I think that he was real. I think he was crucified. I think he taught something like the message that we see in the Gospels, which is unlike the stuff we see in the Gospel of Paul, which became the standard gospel of Christianity. But yeah, I think Jesus existed as a historical character. Yeah, the Corpus Hermeticum says that not having children is a great misfortune, that one will be punished by daemons in the afterlife if you don't do it. Yeah, the most famous, infamous section of the Corpus Hermeticum. If you want to see a much longer discussion of this, you should check out the Hermeticism subreddit. Sam Block has done a great write-up on this section. My sense of it is this represents what Christian Wilberg calls the Gnosticizing editor. That the section where he talks about not having children being punished by demons in the afterlife is the Gnosticizing astrological editor. And so I don't think that this is probably authentic Hermeticism, but I think it's probably a more Gnostic writer that's interposing their ideas into the text. So I don't think this is Ur Gnosticism. Rather, I think I'd agree with Christian Wilberg that what we're seeing in that section is perhaps the Gnosticizing interloper in the text. But I could be wrong about that. The modern Hermeticist, Dana Trails in the chat. Does the Sephirazio protect you against our smoke? It doesn't. It protects us against fire, unfortunately. But you guys have found a clever way around the power of the Sephirazio, right? Which I have just over here. Where's my Sephirazio? Here it is. My copy of Sephirazio is defenseless against your smoke, Dan. You got us. You knew that we could be protected against fire. But we have no protections against smoke. A dreadful situation. What class does Sledge play in D&D? Always DM. I have never played a player character in 30 years. Last player character I ever played was probably a cleric. Probably a cleric. I like clerics, but I haven't played a player character in DM 30 years. I'm almost always the DM, so so I need to do. Yeah, I'm the DM, so that's my character. All right. With the extended discussion of Jennifer Connelly in the chat. Yes, Jennifer Connelly is just like breathtakingly beautiful person. All right, grab a couple more questions, and I'm gonna get going, folks. Have I ever done an episode on faith? This is an interesting question, because I do think that pistis, the concept of pistis as trust, is a very different concept of faith. As just belief in things, especially belief in things in which there is no evidence, which nobody was stupid enough to think that was faith until the 20th century. I don't think. Fideism has always been condemned by the church. And I think fideism has always been condemned by Martin Luther too. I mean, the church's position has always been faith-seeking understanding, which seems to be the wisest possible thing. And so the concept of pistis as belief, I think, is totally misguided. So it would be interesting to talk about what pistis meant early on in Paul and early Christianity, because I think pistis and emunah, the Hebrew equivalent, emunah, which also means faith, is very different than affirming the truth of propositional claims for which you don't have evidence. That's just not, or for which there is even contravailing evidence. That's just not pistis or emunah. So maybe this will be a neat thing. Also, I should say many congratulations to Dana Trail. Let me go see if I have it over here. I'll be right back. Yeah, I have it right here. Congratulations to Dana Trail and Pareca and team for pumping up this bad boy, the Corpus Christianorum in translation. You know, when the title's in Latin, you're going to be paying a lot because it's from Breppels, baby. So new Hermetica just dropped, Latin Hermetica. So I'm really looking forward to getting into this, Dan. I really appreciate the work that all of you guys did. I know you guys worked on this for a long time. So these the Glossae Trismegisti and the Book of Sense Principles and all this sort of stuff. So folks, go get your new Latin Hermetica, courtesy of the Dana Trail team. So many congratulations on getting this book out, Dan. I know we haven't talked in a little while, but many congratulations on rolling that out. All right. What do you believe will happen to our consciousness after the brain shutting down? I don't know if I believe in consciousness to begin with. This is a controversial position that I hold called eliminativist materialism, where I'm not confident that consciousness is a worthwhile philosophical concept. I'm not sure it's a good concept. Not sure it's real. So I am skeptical about the nature and existence of consciousness. But if there is a consciousness, I'm pretty sure it is extinct at death. I don't think that we survive. I don't think we survive. Not only do I not think we survive, I hope we don't. I think I've said this in the past. That one of my greatest nightmare is surviving death. I'm really glad that I don't pay the subscription fees for consciousness. And so when my life passes out from underneath me, hopefully I will. Since I don't pay the subscriptions for consciousness, it won't survive my death. But the idea of being reincarnated or going to heaven or anything like that, any kind of afterlife at all, any afterlife at all, is the worst possible outcome. Unless you get to be kind of a cool ghost for a little while. That'd be kind of fun to be a ghost for like a year, just like creep around, scare people. That'd be fun. But the idea of having to do that forever sounds awful. But maybe for like 6 weeks or something, being a ghost, that'd be fun. Yeah, Mr. Mill, you're probably right. I probably will survive death because it's like the worst possible thing I can imagine, and it's exactly the kind of luck that I have that that I would survive death. What do you think modern Christianity will be like if Gnostic Christianity won the pre-Nicene race instead of Pauline Christianity? The same. I mean, if Gnostic Christianity would have gotten political power via the Roman Empire, which I have every reason to believe that if Valentinus would have become the Bishop of Rome in the 180s, and ultimately the church was already acclimating itself to being Roman, justifying Rome. They were already justifying, rehabilitating Pontius Pilate and all that. The church was already gunning early on to be sort of built into the fabric of Roman society, and so I think that it would have become, like this. I mean, think about it like this, folks. The LDS Church, the LDS Church has one of the most exotic metaphysics, the closest thing you're going to get to Gnosticism in a relatively mainstream Christian denomination. The LDS Church is very Gnostic-y. You have Divine Mother, you have like Kolob, you had all kind of weird stuff in the LDS Church. The LDS Church got all kinds of political power, became institutionalized, and is now completely normie. You can go to an LDS church, you can go into an LDS temple ritual, you can do a full blown LDS and never really experience any of this more esoteric dimension of the LDS church. The exact same thing would have happened with Gnosticism. The Gnostic church, Valentinian church, Tethyan church, they would have become institutional power. They would have become boring and normie. And then maybe back behind this, it had been all kinds of syzygies and weird stuff, but no one would talk about it. You would go to 90% of people would just go to church and do the normal things that they did, and it would just be Christianity. So my sense of it is, if Valentinus would have become the Bishop of Rome and jockeyed somehow for Valentinian theology to become the Orthodox theology of Christianity, which is unlikely, never would have happened, then you'd have got the same thing that happened with the LDS Church. Very exotic metaphysics, some exotic eschatology, some exotic stuff, but it's all buried under politics. So sometimes people have this strange idea that if the Gnostics would have won, we'd have feminine Mary Magdalene, the divine feminine wouldn't. No, that wouldn't have happened. Like, I don't think that zero chance of that would have of happening. I think that it would have become a normie version of whatever it became because it was jockeying for Roman political power. And at the end of the day, that's what institutional Christianity wanted. And I think that ultimately, when they got it, the church became the church because it became an institution. And institutions are not, um, they're not going to be rocking the boat. Further, by the way, if you do want to get into the esoteric dimensions of Christianity, they're there for you. I don't know why people are like, oh, I got to be Gnostic to find the esoteric aspects of Christianity. No, you don't. You just have to go read actual church fathers. Just go read people like Athanasius. I mean, like, oh, I don't like Catholicism because I want more pagan theurgy. They got plenty of theurgy in the Catholic Church. I mean, the Catholic Church, the Mass is theurgy, like full tilt theurgy. So if you want, theurgy and stuff like that in the Mass, it's absolutely there for you. But again, people want more exotic stuff and they want to do, and they don't want to read books. So that's the reason why they go that way, which is I think a real waste and a somewhat a pity. All right, couple more. I'm gonna call it. Is Le Bois a real Cathar song chant? Probably not. Probably not. Just like that famous fake Cathar quote that in 800 years the Cathars will make a reappearance. It's a totally made up quote. It's not. No Cathar really said that. Yeah, it's just a traditional song of Languedoc that they attributed to Cathars. So, but again, yeah, that whole like in 100 years the Cathar Church will re-emerge. I'm like, no Cathar ever said that. But yeah, but again, you say that to the people in Languedoc and the Languedoc Tourism Board, and you'll get killed. They will wage an Albigensian crusade against you. But now it's not because you're a Cathar; it's because you deny the Cathars, and that will get you. That drives down their tourism money in the Languedoc. Um, All right, folks. Let me make sure I got all the supers. Oh yeah, there's a couple here. Get these and call it a day, folks. Thank you. What are your opinions on how academic publishing should be viewed with the decline of academic jobs and the rise of alternatives? I mean, I even called out Brill on Instagram the other day. Brill like showed these like corporates really having fun. You know, we're out there rowing in Leiden next to this picturesque whatchamacallit, this windmill, and I was like, hey, you know, that looks fun. Maybe you should pay your authors. That would be fun too. And and you know, and they wrote back, ouch. I'm like, yeah, whatever, Brill. So yeah, I called out Brill like about this and in the thing, and I think it's a scam. I think academic publishing is a scam. I think it's a gatekeeping scam. I think we need to find alternatives. I don't know what they are, but we got to find alternatives to this. It sucks. So academic publishing is a complete scam. Yeah. What made early Christianity so successful and went from being an oppressed to overtaking a millennia-old state religion within a few centuries? I think Christianity was successful because it told a very compelling theology, which is a compelling theology where a third of the Roman Empire is slaves. And it told a theology where the last will be first and the first will be last, and all you have to do is believe in a guy to get access to the afterlife rather than engaging in all kinds of rigmarole. So I think that it gave a very compelling social story. It gave a very compelling theological story, and it served people. They opened schools. They opened kitchens. They opened homeless shelters. It was a state within a state. So that's why when the Roman Empire converted to Christianity, it was just a very smooth transition because the Christians had basically created a state within a state. So it served all kinds of social functions that the Roman Empire just didn't serve. And so I think that part of that's another reason why materially it provided for people's spiritual needs and it provided for people's spiritual needs. And so when you combine people's spiritual needs and their physical needs, you become a pretty successful organization. You can think about when Al Capone opened soup kitchens or when Hamas ran soup kitchens. You can be sort of the most disliked organization. And as long as you feed people and give people something to believe in, you can be successful. You can be successful. Think about the People's Temple in San Francisco, led by Jim Jones. So it was successful because it provided for people in the way that the empire didn't, spiritually and physically. And in that way, I think Christianity was incredibly successful. All right, one last super sticker. Thank you guys. All right, let's go check something real fast. Okay, great. All right, folks. Well, I appreciate everybody coming and hanging out with me. Sorry I didn't have the chance to hang out a little longer, but I really appreciate folks who had the time to come and hang out and chat. We'll do these more often. You know, like I always love to come and hang out and do these Friday afternoon hangouts. But yeah, appreciate you guys. I hope everyone takes care of themselves. Yeah, have a great weekend. I hope that you're not surrounded by horrifying smoke and lettuce that will give you explosive diarrhea the way that we are here in Michigan. But otherwise than that, folks, hope you have a great Shabbat if you do Shabbat. Otherwise, take care of yourselves. And yeah, thank you guys. See you guys in a couple of weeks.